Australia is still an untapped gold mine. Now, when we look at Australia, we're in a very unique position. We have one of the largest countries in the world in terms of land mass. We have one of the least densely populated countries in the world in terms of people per square kilometre. But we have probably the most diverse reserves of resources in the world in such extraordinary amounts. Okay, now anybody would think with the resource diversity that we have in our country, Australia should be absolutely one of the top nations in the world in terms of economy, military, industrialization, and economic complexity. That's what one would think. It's not as if we're stupid people. There's a lot of smart Australians in this country. So the question remains, how come we in Australia, we're not at one of these top positions? Some people may blame it on our relatively small population. Okay, maybe that has something to play with it, or is somewhat indicative of our position on the world stage. But I would argue that we are where we are due to decades worth of government that time and time again have implemented foreign policy and trade policy that has routinely put Australian creators, inventors, and innovators to the side, whilst propping up the big multinational corporations, selling out our industries to foreign interests, inviting foreign interest in to purchase huge amounts of our country, including but not limited to our sovereign assets, our strategic assets such as ports, mining rights, real estate, and also many of our large corporations. Several have been in, say, dairy, wine production, copper refinery, I believe, and much more. So why exactly is this? Why have Australian politicians and governments over the past few decades, why have they not incentivized Australian innovation and Australian ingenuity and Australian entrepreneurship and Australian exports? Why have they not incentivized that? What we see instead is a model by the government where they make foreign policy, trade policy, and they sell our country out to the highest bidder. And at the end of the financial year, the Liberal Party will show their books to the public and say, look how smart we are. We made a great profit. We balanced the budget. Well, balance the budget at the expense of what? Selling off parts of our country. We saw the selling off of Keswick Island, the Port of Darwin. Here in Melbourne, we saw the selling off of the Port of Melbourne, of course, to a consortium, a Chinese-backed company owning a reasonable share in that particular organization. And what are we left with in the end? We're left with high taxes for business. We're left with an abundance of red tape. We're left with restrictions on exporters and the absolute crippling of Australian business and the restriction of Australian creativity that is so often beaten down with taxes, red tape, and useless government policy. Okay? And that's why I believe we're in the position that we're in, whereby our country, Australia, which should be one of the top countries in the world for industry, where are we ranked in terms of economic complexity? I don't even want to think about it. I believe off the top of my head, it's between 50 and 60, or around 55. The economic complexity of our nation resembles that of a third world country. There's third world nations out there that have greater manufacturing and industrial diversity than what we do in Australia. What has our government been doing this entire time? Selling us out, okay, digging raw resources out of the ground, not bothering to refine those resources or using a tremendous deal of them at home, simply loading those resources onto ships and sending them to other nations, some of which one day may very well become a very dangerous enemy of Australia. Okay, I think that's not hard to imagine when we look at the expansionist strategy of the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so what do we need to change this in our country? I think we need a complete paradigm shift. We need people to think big. Okay, we need huge tax cuts on local business, especially innovative businesses, advanced manufacturing, and Australian exporters. and most definitely some major adjustments to our foreign and trade policy. Labor and Liberal, they cannot get it right. They do not have the solution to this issue. They are the problem, not the solution. Now, to put what I'm saying in perspective, I have a series of reserves here that I'm going to run through with you in terms of our resources here in Australia to really paint a picture how much of an opportunity we have on our hands and the extent to which that opportunity is being wasted by self-serving politicians, many of whom do not love this country. All right, so check this out. I'm going to run through it with you. Have a look at this. Alrighty, where are we? Okay, so profiling the top 5 largest iron ore producing countries from NS Energy. Australia coming in at number 1 for the world's largest iron ore producing country. And it's important to point out this is usable iron ore. There are other countries out there that maybe have larger reserves or produce more, but we're only interested in iron ore that is of high value here. So Australia coming in at number 1. Uranium, okay, coming from the World Nuclear Association. Australia's uranium resource, as it says here, are the world's largest, almost 1/3 of the world total. Now, just imagine, instead of shipping all this uranium off on ships, imagine we used it for our own energy production. Imagine the tremendous amount of money that Australian producers, manufacturers, and industry could save if they had access to cheap, reliable energy that, by the way, is environmentally friendly. Instead, what do? We ship it on boats and we send it overseas. A lot of it goes to Japan. All right. Coal reserves, we have Australia coming in here in position number 2. Natural gas, Australia coming in at 27th. Lithium reserves, Australia coming in at number 5. Okay, so lithium very important for batteries, electric vehicles, but also a lot of emerging industries that will ultimately take us into the future. Copper reserves, we have Australia coming in at number 3. Rare earth elements used in a lot of advanced manufacturing, robotics, electric cars, basically the industries of tomorrow. Australia coming in at position number 6, which is really quite competitive given the global appetite for these resources. Oil reserves here, okay, something Australia is not known for, but nonetheless coming in at position number 34. Gold, Australia coming in at position number 1. Zinc, Australia coming in at position number 1. Lead, Australia coming in again at position number 1. And if you'd like more information on our resources and where we stack up in the world, again, mcjreport.com/join. I'll send you the email tomorrow, and I'll also send you this document here from the government, Geoscience Australia, detailing commodities and where in the world we stand in relation to these commodities. So basically what I'm trying to put into perspective here is that we're so incredibly lucky, blessed, fortunate to have access to this diversity of resources more than any country really needs. We should be incentivizing innovation and upping our position on the global stage, but instead our politicians are holding us back, selling us out, and stripping away our freedoms. Now, let me add in that everything I've just mentioned on this report in terms of our resources, it all means nothing if we don't have freedom, by the way. It doesn't matter how bad the trade policies are or our foreign policy. If we are not free to live as free Australians, which is our God-given right, then the government may as well sell us out and go all the way. So just to put it in perspective, there's a lot worth fighting for in this country. We must seek to reacquire our bodily integrity, our dignity, our freedom. But at the same time, I think we can all agree that we'd love to see a major shift in our policy, the bolstering of local business, and the advancement of Australia on the world stage. So